In this episode, I want to talk about how to survive a price war. So, who am I? Well, um, my name is Sjofors. I'm called the Price Whisperer, and I'm involved in a lot of business organizations. And of course, I have my new book out there called The Price Whisperer as well. Price wars is something that many companies sooner or later end up in a price war of some sort. And the, the, there's a couple of things to remember when it comes to price wars. First of all, there is no winner in a price war. There's never any winner, right? And why is that? Well, because in a price war, the various vendors, the service providers, the product manufacturers, whatever it is, once they're in a price war, once they allow themselves to enter a price war, they their profit margins is going tanking basically, right? And and what does low profit means? Well, it means less resource. It means less resource for new product development. It means less resource for servicing their customers. It means less resource to market. It means less resources to hire better people, right? And once you're in the price war, you're in a downward spiral that is not going to end until you take action and you step out of the price war, right? Think about this. Um, in the last, I don't know, 12 years or so, um, every single American airline have gone into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, except Southwest, right? Um, there's two things to consider here then. Um, One is that I was I was frequently going between Los Angeles, where I'm based, and the Bay Area for many years. And the low cost carrier, i.e., Southwest, was almost always the high price choice. You could almost always get the same uncomfortable seats in one of the quote unquote legacy carriers at a cheaper price, right? Because they were in a price war, and Southwest decided that is not for us, right? So obviously they were not completely immune to pricing and price wars, but they were rarely the most affordable choice for that, and that eventually led to that all the other carriers ended up in bankruptcy. So why is that bad? Well, it's bad for the consumer because suddenly they have less choices. It's bad for a consumer because the service gets worse and worse and worse. It's bad for the consumer because they get nickel and dimed, charge for this, charge for that, and so forth. And I mean, flying is for most people not a very pleasant experience, right? And so that's from the consumer point of view. From the employee point of view, they lost employees. They had to downsize. They had to kick out people. They had to reduce salaries, right? None of which is particularly good. From investors' point of view, the investors in many cases lost their investments, or at least their investment was significantly reduced. So it's not good for investors either. So um, there is no winners in a price war, right? Now, how do you how so what happened then in your case if suddenly there is a price war on the horizon? What are you going to do, right? Um, well, it's a choice to enter a price war. You don't have to, right? You may step out, sit on the sidelines, and see how the other competitors in the market is is trying to kill each other by saying that by lowering the prices until they start to fail. And you don't, because you made the choice not to enter a price war. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're going to have a smaller market share, right? But a smallish, say, market, but very profitable market share, while your competition dies around you, may not be a bad idea, because what do you do when they disappear? Well, you expand, you take their market share, right? Obviously, not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's something that you need to consider, right? And let's say that there is a looming price war. Do you have to participate with all your products or with all your services? No, you don't. You may decide that a particular product or a particular service is strategically and tactically important for you to sort of defend your position with, and participate with that product or service, but not other products or services, right? You don't have to do it all. Likewise, you may decide to participate in the price war in certain geographic areas and not in other geographic areas, right? Because in most cases, different geographic areas have different competition, and the buyers may have different profiles, and everything is typically different in a different location. Somewhat is completely different, somewhat is not marginally different, but it's still different. So it's a choice you have to participate or not. And obviously, from my position, I think you shouldn't participate at all. You can also decide that you want to position your company differently, reposition your company maybe, right? So suddenly you're not in the same business as a price, as the business that are in the price war, right? Let me give you an example. This company had this idea that they're going to provide a service to help car buyers to get the car they wanted, right? Now, that's a commodity. You have websites, you have magazines, you have all different ways of learning about cars, so that you are an informed buyer when you buy a car, or lease a car for that matter, of course. And those are typically either free because they're ad supported, or very low cost at some point, at some cases, right? So this company was in that business, and it's a commodity. Nobody has pricing power. Companies are trying to add value by adding branding and so forth, and it works to some extent, but it's still a commodity. So what this company did was they repositioned themselves into a concierge, sort of not an information platform, but an actual buying platform, just as you have personal shoppers for clothing and stuff like that in affluent areas. They position themselves to be the car shopper. We all know how terrible it is to be on the car dealer lot, right? Nobody wants that. This company repositioned themselves. They had all that data, so their client could decide what they buy, but then they actually did the shopping for the client themselves, and they didn't have to participate in this commodity market that they started off in, right? Other ways you can decide not to participate in price wars are focusing on a particular customer segment that are not price sensitive, that appreciate your differentiators and care less about the competition, and care less about lower price, right? Again, it may be a smaller niche, but it could be very profitable, more profitable than for your competitors. So you get more resource to drive your business forward, right? While competition dies around you, right? And focusing your whole business on not low price, but understanding what drives people to be willing to pay higher prices. I mean, what do we look at? I don't know the exact latest numbers, but it used to be that that Apple has had a 15% share of the smartphone industry, and generated 90% of its profits, right? And they, Apple, whether you like them or not, have managed to create some kind of mystique around their brand that support higher prices. Their phones are technically not very innovative. The other manufacturers have phones with better performance, newer features, yada yada yada. Yet it is Apple that command the highest prices in almost all cases, and they don't participate in price wars ever. Right? That's not in the DNA. Right? So and this to differentiate to differentiate yourself, whether it's in products or in services, or branding, is just so important. And it is always the way to I wouldn't say not win a price war, because you can't win a price war when you're not participating in the war, right? But you can be on the sidelines and pick up the pieces once the that war is kind of over. Another way you can solve a price war issue is to start multiple brands. It's not so easy. It's expensive, but it's a way of saying that here is our brand that we are in price war, that we allow ourselves to be in a price war with, and here's a brand that is going to provide the profits the company needs, right? So the other thing to act is that if there is a looming price war, you need to act very quickly with whatever you do. If it's repositioning, if it's deciding what product or services should participate or not, it needs to be quick, because if it's not, suddenly in that price war you have lost a lot of your business, and then it may even be too late. So anyway, in closing here, participating in a price war is a choice. You may choose to do it, which I don't recommend. You may choose to do it in part, which could be a solution. Or you can simply decide not to participate and see a different outcome. Yes, you will probably see a decrease in market share, but market share is not everything. Price and profits actually is what drives the business, not the market share, right? So anyway, I hope you found these advice of interest, and thank you much for your time, and I'm looking forward to see you the next time. Thank you much.